Well, good evening and welcome everyone at home to the 54th meeting of the Wee Alba Book round Scotland. We're here tonight in the Old Kirk and we're going to have a great evening talking about Scottish independence.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. You'll hear me in a minute, don't worry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome along to the 54th Wee Alba book launch. It's not a launch anymore. This is a road show that's been going across this country, north, south, east and west. Every time we go, it's different. People are interested in what Alba have got to say because nothing else is happening within independence at the moment, and what we say is important. So tonight, if you've got any questions, Alec, Jacqui or Neale are more than happy to answer whatever you want. So first of all, I'd like to invite Neale to come up and say a couple of words.
Thanks very much, Craig. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that mic on? I'll just have to hold it with the kit and caboodle on it. Okay, well, it's great to be able to welcome Alec to Kirkcaldy. Kirkcaldy is a very special place for me, not just because I have the great honour to be the MP, but it was the centre of my universe when I was growing up. My weekends in the 70s and 80s were spent going to the ice rink and then walking down past the old linoleum mills to the high street for a quick jaunt into Bruce's record shop or Sleeves. And that was a different time and a different place, really, from where we are now. But through that period of time, we've gone from where we had mass employment in industry and mines and all of those important historical employers in the area. We now have a much different economic situation, and much of that transformation took place during the years of Thatcherism. And certainly my experience through those years was when I was training at the Vic, and I came in contact with mine workers and RGC workers and folk who were involved in industry in the local area. And, you know, one of the big differences was then, you know, everybody had a few bob in their pocket to go out for a pint at the weekend. That never was a real problem. People didn't experience the same kind of poverty and deprivation that we see so widespread now. I don't remember hearing about food banks when I was a teenager or in my early 20s. And it's really important because as we try to revive our high streets and we complain about various different reasons for that, whether it's online shopping or whatever, the reality is that if people don't have spare change in their pocket, they're not going to be able to support a high street or its regeneration, no matter how much money the council throw at enhancing the area. I left Scotland in '93 because I couldn't get a permanent job in the Scottish NHS, so I had to go to London if I was to realise my ambition of progress in my career and to access further education at university down there. And, you know, that was fine for me at that time. And things changed in Scotland during that period of time. And I saw some of that when I came up and down before and after devolution. But it wasn't really until I got back here in 2009 that I really understood the value of devolution. And from the beginning of devolution, we saw real advantages to being able to make decisions for our own communities, for our own people, in a way that we'd never experienced when I was younger. And then it was just so clear to me in the lead up to the 2011 Scottish general election that there was a real need to fight the case for independence, because I knew when the Tories got back in with David Cameron in 2010 that things would be bad. I didn't think they were going to be as bad as they have been. I don't think anyone could have predicted the situation that many people find themselves in now. But it was Alex Salmond's team, record and vision commitment that really won that election in 2011 and cast us on the pathway towards that first independence referendum in 2014. And there is a very real risk that the progress that was made, not just under the SNP, but also with the earlier Labour administrations, all of those advances of devolution are now at risk. And some people want to talk about how we protect devolution. Well, the best way to protect those advances is not to protect devolution. It is to secure independence and full control over our potential and our resources. Because we need to build the economic case and strength if we are to rebuild the confidence of the people in Scotland that self-government, that independence, is the right choice going forward. If you take, for example, energy. So in Fife, we are replete with energy, whether it's the wind turbines or the petrochemical plants or Brayfoot Bay and the opportunities of tidal. All of those opportunities are there to exploit. We've also got a significant number of disused mine workings that are open for hydrothermal. So we have vast resources just in Fife of energy, and we're surrounded by wind turbines offshore. But the energy companies and the UK government are the only ones that are benefiting from it. There's no benefit to the people in my constituency who turn up and tell me how they have to regulate their heating during the winter months. The pensioners that come in and quite proudly tell me that they're managing to keep on top of their skyrocketing energy bills because they just don't heat their homes any longer. But that is just not good enough. So I'll give you a good example. The energy costs for businesses in the area have again gone through the roof. And so Kirkcaldy Ice Arena, which was a big part of my younger years, is under enormous pressure because they've seen their bills go from a few grand a month to over £30,000 a month. And that's not something that they can switch off. If you switch off the refrigeration, you switch off the ice. And I wrote to every energy company that is invested in the Fife economy, offshore, onshore, every single one of them, asking them to come up with something to offer the Fife community to support our ice arena so that we didn't lose that iconic facility. And none of them, or all but one of them, didn't reply. They just said no, flat no. Shell came back and offered 1 to 10,000 maximum for a community grant, which just wouldn't touch the sides. So we have to reshape the way our economy works, and we have to make sure that the energy that we sit upon is there to support our people, not to be siphoned off for the enrichment and benefit of others. So where we find ourselves now is that we are in a very strange position as part of the independence movement. There is a need to unite and for the movement itself to take control of the situation, because the trials and tribulations of the SNP cannot be the trials and tribulations of the independence movement. And I think it's really important that we challenge that narrative at every opportunity that we possibly can. And so I, make no apology for taken that argument to the media on whichever channel. You may be aware that a recent TV appearance on GB News caused consternation in certain circles. But what they failed to mention was that the guest immediately prior to me was the SNP representative. And it's not really that I'm not whinging about the SNP. The point I'm trying to make is that we have to get match fit for an independence campaign, whether there's a referendum day or not. That exercise involves engaging with our opponents and building our arguments and understanding the arguments that they're going to throw back at us, so that when the attention becomes ever keener on the case for independence, we're able to armour ourselves and defend our case robustly. So, I don't think that there's any value in no platforming people. It's been half the problem that we've had over the last 4 years, where if you're not saying the right thing, somehow you're excluded. If we are making arguments that exclude others, then we are excluding supporters from the case for independence. And that is not a winning strategy. So it's just not a credible way to win the battle ahead. Now, I was a bit naughty. I wrote a piece for the National, which came out today, and I kind of tried to put that whole no platforming, being offended argument in its place, because I've got a few words that I wrote to try and give it some context. So can you imagine that the Battle of Bannockburn didn't happen, and that the Flower of Scotland went something like this: "Of Flower of Scotland, when will we see your likes again? We're right offended by nasty Edward's reign. We're black affronted with King Edward's wordies." I mean, that song would never be written, because you don't write national songs to celebrate somebody being offended. You have to be ready for the battle ahead, and every battle is either won or lost. I've had experience of being on the losing side. I don't want to have that experience again, and I certainly don't want to be responsible or play a part in guaranteeing it before we've even begun. So we need to exercise our arguments, we need to prepare ourselves, and most importantly, we need to be honest with ourselves. So if we are making an argument that is defeating the case for independence, we have to have the courage and the humility to both say that that's a problem, but also to listen that that's a problem. And there are obvious policies, which I won't go into just now, that really fall into that category. So the other thing that I would say is that this is not a dress rehearsal. This is it. This is us on that path. We don't get to say, oh, can we go back to last week and do it again? Every day is one day further forward, and we have to make it count. So, how we do that, I hope that there is a change of heart with some of my former colleagues, that we are able to do the kinds of things that Kerry and I are absolutely up for, which is, direct action in Westminster, to take the arguments robustly forward in the chamber, to take every opportunity to press the case and disrupt that Parliament until they see sense and accept democracy. What won't work is fighting battles that have already been lost in the hearts and minds of the Scottish people, because that is not a case that will take us any further forward. But no one who goes down to Westminster should be under any illusion that this is somehow a job for life or a career opportunity. When I stood for election with a clear mission in my mind, which was to go down there, to stand up for Scotland, and as a part of an extraction mission, to get Scotland out of that union and establish our independence. What doesn't work, and is a fantasy it could ever work, is to go down there en masse and believe that dotting the I's and crossing the T's on Tory policy will in any way advance the case for independence, and that's been proven repeatedly. So I'm going to close now, but in 2019, I was very clear what the purpose of standing for election was. I knew what my mission was. And at that time, and in the years since, I think I've demonstrated, and I want everybody to feel the same level of commitment, I've demonstrated that no one person will tell me to stand down or otherwise step aside or give opponents an easy ride, because we must press the case for our country's freedom and its place as an independent nation in the world. And I'm very grateful to you all for turning up tonight, and with that I'll close. Thanks.
Thanks, Neale. I'd like to now introduce our Alba Party candidate from last year, a well-known local activist, Jacqui Bijster.
I'm going to emulate Neale and pick the whole thing up because I don't want to mess with it. So, hello everybody. It's a funny old time just now, isn't it? There's a lot of things have happened, a lot of situations that perhaps we didn't see coming. And it's really good to see so many of you out tonight. I was up in Arbroath the other week. Maybe some of you were there as well, and I saw Jim Sillars was speaking, and another gentleman. But one thing that Jim Sillars said that really struck a chord with me, he was talking about the hard days in the SNP, the earlier days in the SNP, and he said that what was important in getting through that and getting to where the SNP got to under Alex was patience and stamina, and that was a phrase that just really struck me, and it also reminded me of a wee story. Which, so if you will bear with me, I'm going to tell you a wee family legend that phrase reminded me of. So my dad came over to Scotland from Northern Ireland as a young man, and he met my mum. And my mum, obviously wanting to show him Scottish culture, she took him to the Links Market. And he went to play, one of these things where you shoot at the target and you can get a goldfish if you get three, hit the target 3 times or whatever. And I think in those days, it was before health and safety, I think it was actually an air gun they were shooting, not that I was there. And so he paid his money and he took his turn, and he said to the guy, "The sights are off on this gun. This isn't fair. This game is no fair." And of course the man behind the counter laughed at him. And the people round about kind of, giggled as well at the naivety of this guy thinking the game should be fair. And but my dad was a quiet man. He was a very quiet man, but he was a very determined man on the quiet. And he wasn't Scottish, but he had a good streak of thrownness, a good Scottish thrownness in him. So he didn't just, go home or go play something else. He paid his money and took another turn. And he kept taking another turn until he worked out exactly how much the sights were off by. And then he started winning. And he won prize after prize. And the people round about who had been laughing at him started to kind of go, "Can you win me a goldfish for my granddaughter?" And he played and he won prizes until the man told him he was barred and to go somewhere else. So, and I really think there is a point to this. I really think that in the weird circumstances that we're in at the moment, it's tempting to be downhearted, and it's tempting to be angry and to turn on each other. And we're in a situation where the game isn't fair, and some of us have maybe realised just how unfair the game actually is. And we know there are people out there, that are laughing at the independence movement at this point, that think that we're down and out, we're doomed. But actually, I think this is really a time when we have a huge opportunity. And it's not a time for going home in a huff. It's not a time for giving up. It's not a time for tearing lumps out each other. It's a time for that quiet determination, for patience and stamina and keeping on working. And the fact that you're all out here tonight on a Thursday night shows me that is what is happening. And it's time for that streak of thrownness that I think Scotland Scots are very good at. And that's what's going to win us the prize. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacqui. This is the first time I've done this, and believe me, this is for me a huge honour. I have few people that I look up to and admire as much as the next speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who needed one mandate to give Scotland their choice, the Right Honourable Salmond.
Well, thanks very much, Craig, and thanks to Neale and Jacqui as well. And I was just thinking as I was in this splendid Old Kirk and Kirkcaldy, 500 years old, I'm told, that the last most influential person I met from Kirkcaldy, and don't empty say Adam Smith, because I didn't actually meet him, but it was a guy called Colin, right? And he had a guilty secret. He was really from Cowdenbeath, but he'd moved up in the world to come to Kirkcaldy. And he's a caddie, probably still is a caddie at the courses in St Andrews. And a couple of weeks after the referendum in 2014, I had a visitor from America, the president of the New York St Andrews Society. And New York St Andrews Society is a group of well-set Scots expats or their descendants, mostly are lawyers, and anyway, they're all very rich anyway. But they're good-hearted, and they make a donation every year to York Hill Children's Hospital in Glasgow. So I thought, in view of the donation they make and the anxiety of the society to help Scotland, I would arrange for the president of New York St Andrews Society to achieve his life ambition and play in the Old Course at St Andrews. And one of the good things about being First Minister, you can play any golf course in the country you like. With the exception of Muirfield. They didn't like me because I boycotted the Open because they wouldn't allow women members. But with the exception of Muirfield, you could play, well, maybe not Trump. I couldn't play Trump because we fell out. So with the exception of Muirfield and Trump, I could play any course I liked. So I arranged this game as foursomes in the Old Course. And Colin was my caddie. And I was playing with the Scottish girls champion, who was a student at St Andrews University. And the president of the St Andrews Society was playing one of the lady professionals from Scotland. Anyway, the girls champion was on fire. She birdied every hole. And we were 7 up at the turn. So much so, I said to her, listen, I took her aside and said, listen, can you ease off a little? Because I didn't want the president of St Andrews Society not to enjoy his experience. You know, if you're 7 down at the turn, it's getting a wee bit rocky. Not that he was bored. He seemed to be enjoying himself fine. And I was playing total rubbish, but she was winning. And when the girl paid no attention to me, we won 7 and 6 or something. So, however, as the game, so we played a bye, and as I was playing the bye, I said to Colin, because it was a couple of weeks after the referendum, I said, where are you from? He says, well, I'm Kirkcaldy, but I was born in Cowdenbeath, you see. And he says, a week before the referendum, the weekend before the referendum, I went round my old street in Cowdenbeath and the Beef, and every single house had a yes poster. And I was so proud. So proud, he said, on my street in the Beef, every single house had a yes poster up. And I said, well, Colin, you voted yes, obviously. He said, no, I voted against. And I said, what do you mean you voted against? You're not getting a tip. He said, well, he says, you know, I just thought to myself, we're having a referendum, we're going to be independent, but it's going to be a close thing, you know? And when we become independent, I don't want it to be a close thing. I want it to be a big vote for independence, so I voted against. Not quite sure the logic there, but I can see something of logic. And actually, I was quite heartened by that, because he says, you know, next time there's a referendum, it'll be a huge majority for yes. A huge majority. No doubt, he said. And of course, reasonably speaking, he should have been correct. Because remember, that was before Brexit, before Boris Johnson, before Scots with the greatest energy potential in the continent of Europe, freezing in their homes over this last winter, before all of these things, it was 45%. There's not a single youngster under the age of 25 got to vote in the referendum of 2014. Whole generation of Scots have not voted on their nation's independence. And that generation, as we all know, is about 3/4 in favour of yes, of independence. So by any reasonable estimation, we shouldn't be sitting on 45% now, we should be sitting on 60%. And each and every one of us in the yes movement has to ask the question, why? Why is it not powered ahead? Now, as Jacqui rightly said, and Neale said, the vote hasn't gone backwards. The SNP vote right now is in a lot of trouble for understandable reasons. But significantly, the yes vote, the independence vote's up at 47%. And that's, you know, historically, that's great. You know, I was going to go back 30 years, but let's go back to the day I signed the Edinburgh Agreement, the Treaty of Edinburgh, as I called it, because I wanted it like being between two nations, you see, so I thought, that's good, Treaty of Edinburgh. With David Cameron, I remember it well, the day was going superbly well, and an opinion poll came out and said support for independence was 29%, which was very inconvenient, and I was very annoyed it come out that day. But that was the historical position. I mean, the support for the SNP had gone to 45% in 2011, as Neale said, but the support for Scottish independence was way back at 29%. There was a huge gap. The SNP were dragging forward support for Scottish independence. But within a couple of years, because of the referendum campaign and because of the flowering across the amazing summer of 2014 of a whole variety of people who had never been involved in politics who were part of the yes movement, the vote surged forward to 45%. So now we're in a position where support for independence is at 47%, according to the latest polls, but support for the SNP is somewhere in the 30s and starting to decline fast. It's dragging back the support for independence. It's an anchor, it's an albatross around the neck of the independence movement. Now that, historically, is a totally different position from anything we've ever experienced. Because the SNP won elections, I remember in 2011, we won them a huge victory, an absolute majority in a proportional parliament, and the press said aye, but they're not really voting for independence. You know, they're voting because Ian Gray ran into a shop in Glasgow Station instead of facing protesters, or they're voting for you because the rest of them are numpties. I mean, I'm not saying that wasn't true, incidentally. I'm just saying that's what they said. So therefore, we have to address this situation. Today I noticed the Stone of Destiny was taken from Scotland to England. And I also heard the Lord Lion, King of Arms, and various other folk say that we should all be incredibly proud that Scotland is going to be represented at the coronation by our stone being such an important and integral part of the ceremony. That's certainly going to be a real surge for me. What a historical insult to the country. The Stone of Destiny was only ever underneath the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey because it was ransacked, pillaged, stolen in the 1290s by Edward Plantagenet, Hammer of the Scots. And the reason he sat on it and wanted all his successors to sit in it was to symbolise English overlordship over Scotland. So we have to be proud to continue the tradition of English overlordship over Scotland, because that's what Edward, who was, for all his faults, and he had a many, was no fool. Edward Plantagenet understood if you wanted to eliminate a nation, then what you had to do was erase its history, erase its records, erase its symbols, erase its nationality, and wipe it from history. And we've got people who have never really heard of the Stone of Destiny, who think it's a rather good idea that we should return it to Westminster Abbey to be part of a ceremony which symbolises overlordship over Scotland. It's ridiculous. And they say, oh, well, in 1995, when the stone was returned to Scotland in a big ceremony, we promised to give it back for the purposes of the coronation. Now, I'm a reasonable expertise in Scots law. I've had cause to be over the last few years. And I'll tell you something, you cannot put a condition on the return of stolen property. You can't say, I'll give you back your property, but incidentally, only if you lend me it back. So, I would merely suggest, not because I believe it's the most important issue facing the Scottish people right now, but a nation without self-esteem, without self-confidence, without a sense of its history is no nation at all, as Edward I understood. And therefore, I have to say, if I'd been First Minister at the present moment, I would have said, quite reasonably, you're not getting it. And you'll get it the day that you recognise what the stone properly symbolises, which is Scottish sovereignty. That's why it was important to the nation and kingdom of Scotland, because it symbolises Scotland's independence, right to a monarchy, right to a kingship, right to freedom. And the day you recognise Scotland's right of self-determination is the day we'll give you our stone back to have your ceremony. Because then, when you sit on it, you won't be sitting on the country, you'll be accepted the country as equals. Now, I'm a member of the Privy Council, and therefore, I have it within me to advise King Charles III on what he should be doing. And I was strongly tempted, before Christmas, to write him a wee note and say, look, the clever thing to do would be to have a Scottish coronation, as well as your English coronation. But then I thought to myself, well, I actually lead a party which is Republican in terms of its inclination and believes in an elected head of state, so maybe it's not really my place. It would be unwarranted advice to say, because that is exactly what he should have done. Not have some sort of half-cut ceremony afterwards where he graciously accepts the honours of Scotland. My next-door neighbour was called Nan Bothwick, right? You couldn't get a more respectable person. When I grew up in Livegate, Nan Bothwick stayed next door to us. She was a pillar of the community. She was a wonderful woman. She was president of the Bowling Club. She worked for 40 years for blood transfusion. She got honour on honour on honour, a pillar of the community. And I found out from conversation with her one night how she'd sheltered people who'd erased Elizabeth II from pillar boxes because she was so outraged at the idea you could have a Queen Elizabeth II before you had a Queen Elizabeth I in Scotland. And then she told me how outraged she'd been in 1953 when Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen, Elizabeth, Queen of Scots, accepted the honours of Scotland in a twin set in perils. Now, I think Charles will probably do better. He'll probably have his old kilt on when he does it. It's still an insult to the country. If he wants to be King of Scots, and frankly, I don't think we should have a king at all. But if he wants to be King of Scots, then he should recognise Scottish nationality, Scottish nationhood, and have a proper coronation in Scotland, as indeed Charles I did when he was looking for support. Charles II did, rather, when he was looking for support against Cromwell in 1651. So what's all this history about? The history is to recognise that this Kirk is 500 years old, but Scotland's story is 1,000 years old. This country of ours had a sense of nationality unrivalled in Europe 700 years ago, when Germany wasn't thought of, France wasn't united, Italy was a figment of the imagination of papal states and all sorts of little kingdoms of the formerly of the Holy Roman Empire. I've never argued in my entire political career that Scots are better than anybody else, more entitled than anybody else. Every nation has equality, as indeed the Declaration of Arbroath said before God. Every nation has equal rights. But we have the right, as any other nation has, to our self-determination, to our self-respect, to our ability to choose the government that we want, not the government imposed on us by other people. That's the reality. For that 1,000 years, the cause of Scotland, the cause of independence, ebbed and flowed. It had its high points and its low points. Historically speaking, we're actually in a good period at the present moment. Why? Because if we'd been sitting here 25 years ago in this hall, we'd have been thinking there might be a Scottish Parliament. Now, there is a Scottish Parliament. If we'd been sitting 18 years ago, we'd say, well, maybe the SNP might win an election sometime. Well, the SNP won an election in 2007. If we'd been sitting here, 10 years ago, we'd say, I wonder if we'll ever get a chance to vote for independence. Well, we had the chance in 2014. And now we've got to work out how we get another chance. Because everybody is entitled to a second chance. Every person and every nation. So how do we do it? What is to be done? Well, firstly, we recognise that 47% is not a figment, that's a reality. That's the strength of the independence movement in Scotland. Few countries in the world have ever had that reservoir of support for national independence and not proceeded to become independent. But we have to find a way to formulate it, to revive and to recreate that yes movement from 2014, which surged it forward from 29% to 45%. And that movement must be reborn and recreated, and it must be separate from any political party. SNP, ALPA, Greens, Scottish Socialists, whatever. It must have its own life and its own vitality. Now, the movement is active. I mean, there's more organisations with more acronyms and more initials than you can shake a stick at. I mean, even I can't keep track on all of the organisations. But they have to be coordinated, not necessarily merged, but coordinated, brought together, so that the think tanks are doing the thinking, the rally organisers are doing the rallying, the folk who want to lobby internationally are doing the lobbying, and everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and work together with the purpose of surging Scotland forward. So the yes movement must bring a life of its own. There's a rally, important rally, in my estimation, a week on Saturday in Glasgow. I think it'd be a good thing if we all turned out from all parts of the movement and bring to life that yes movement. Secondly, we have to encourage the new thinking about independence. Because you see, the world of 2023 is not the world of 2014. The world has changed. Things have changed. It's tougher, it's harder. I mean, the economists in the Bank of England tell us we've all got to accept the fact that we are poor and getting poorer. I mean, you might think they busy themselves how to making us less poor, richer, but no, their formulation. Like the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, who a year ago went to a Commons committee and couldn't remember his salary. I mean, obviously somebody doesn't know where the next pound is coming from, but thought the workers should express restraint as he sat on, I know his salary, it's over 600,000 incidentally, but that's... So, we have to look at the new world, the world of now and the world of tomorrow, and we have to match the independence campaign to that world. Lots of things have changed since 2014. And the thinking has to be done so that the case for independence matches that new reality. We take just one example you'll get in the Wee Alba book. We called it the Wee Alba book because it's wee. But it's big in terms of its content. And one of the points that's made in this book is our attitude to Europe, which is fundamentally important. A month or so ago, statistics came out showed that the Republic of Ireland is now twice as prosperous, GDP per head, gross domestic product, to translate the economic lingo, is twice now that of the UK. Twice. Just think of that for a second. The Republic of Ireland, a country that used to be laughed at by the Westminster's powers that are, is now per head, at least in GDP terms, twice as prosperous as the United Kingdom. And then think to yourself, what has the Republic of Ireland got that Scotland hasn't got? I mean, I love the Irish, adore the Irish, but they have nothing in terms of resources, in terms of education, in terms of talented, and listen, they are a talented, innovative people. But if Ireland can get to that position, then so can Scotland. And what's been the ingredient of Irish success? Back in the days of the Declaration of Arbroath and the Stone of Scoon getting pillaged by Edward I, the chroniclers in Ireland and Scotland, and they were often the same because of the influence of Iona and Irish Christendom and the rest of it, used to say that Ireland and Scotland were, and these were the words, the ends of the earth. You know, there's a map in England which shows the medieval world as at 1300, a very famous map. And if you try to find Scotland on it, you can see it just perched on the left-hand side of the map. You know, a puff of wind would blow it off. And in the wise of the medieval world, Scotland and Ireland were the very ends of the earth. So how come a country like Ireland on the western fringe of Europe is now achieving that wealth or prosperity? Well, the answer is, of course, the Irish magnificently have placed themselves at the centre of European decision-making and, above all, at the centre of the European marketplace. So if Scotland is going to achieve that success, then we've got to get into that marketplace as quickly as possible. Now, why is that relevant to the Wee Alba book? Well, the story the SNP had when I was leader, and now it would be that we're going to join the European Union. And we're not coming independent, we're going to rejoin the European Union. Fine. How long does it take to rejoin the European Union? 5 years, minimum. And it doesn't matter how friendly the rest of Europe is to Scotland, and Scotland has plenty of friends, it still takes you 5 years. So just imagine a situation, not too difficult. Let's say that Neale Hanvey is First Minister of Scotland. A couple of years' time. That Sir Keir Starmer is Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That's more difficult to imagine, I know. But let's just imagine it for a second. And they're having negotiations at Hexham, right? And Neale Hanvey is looked at by Sir Keir Starmer, and Keir says to Neale, what's your trade policy going to be if we agree to this independence? And Neale was to say, well, in 5 years' time, we're going to rejoin the European Union. And even Keir Starmer would probably have the wit to say, but what are you going to do in 5 weeks' time or 5 months' time? So, it's a problem. So when you face a political problem, because people will want to know this sort of thing when independence comes back to the crunch, you can either run away, pretend it's no there, or alternatively, you can face it. Do you pack up and go home, or do you realise there's another organisation called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, which doesn't take 5 years to join, it takes 3 months to join, and which all 4 countries in it, which are Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, will welcome Scotland with open arms. And EFTA doesn't get you to the European Union, but it's a passport to get you back into the single marketplace, and it's a passport to enjoy the sort of prosperity which is currently enjoyed by the Irish Republic and will shortly, incidentally, be enjoyed by Northern Ireland, because they will have the trading advantages that the rest of these islands lack. They'll have access to the single marketplace. I mean, England's a fantastic country in many, many ways, but right now, it's a country where it's easier to get into without a passport than it is to get out of with a passport. That's the reality. So think what, I mean, you know, I bought a car for the first time in a large number of years. I bought it last year. It hasn't arrived yet because they're still trying to match its chassis to something somewhere in France. So it's that's me trying to buy an electric car. You know? So there you go. It's important to be part of that marketplace. You know, when William Wallace won his magnificent victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and he and Andrew de Murray, you know the first thing they did after they won that surprising and magnificent victory, something that wasn't in the film Braveheart. They went for a pint first, and then right after going for a pint, they wrote a letter to the Hanseatic League, the trading relationship across Europe. And I'll translate it freely from the Latin. What it said was, there's been a change, we're back in charge, can we have our trading concessions back, please? And if it was good 700 years ago, it's right today. But you have to adjust the case to meet the times, which is why the Wee Alpa book says, look, for goodness sake, recognise the reality. If you're going to strengthen that part of the independence argument, then back after. 10 years afterwards, yes, of course, you might decide to join the European Union. Many EFTA countries have in the past. But right now, if you're going into independence, you need access to that marketplace, and you need it quickly to consolidate your economic position. And thirdly, and lastly, the political parties who believe in independence have to find a way of working together. That's not going to be easy, but you're going to have to do it. I think Alpa has got the most enormous prospects in the next Scottish elections. Because it's a proportional election, it's a list system. I'll be extremely surprised if Alpa doesn't have a substantial block of seats in the Scottish Parliament because of the clarity of the message it's putting forward on independence. But there's an election next year, a Westminster election. And it's going to be a tough election because the SNP are unlikely to be in a great position to fight it. You've got a situation where the SNP brand has been severely damaged and, in my estimation, will get damaged further. So how do you fight an election in these contexts? Well, firstly, you get your foot off the accelerator of saying SNP and onto the accelerator of saying independence. Because the cause of independence, as we remember, is now a great deal more popular than the SNP. So therefore, we should fight the election on a Scotland United platform. And candidates, the vast majority of them would be the current SNP MPs, who should fight under SNP Scotland United. Neale and Kenny should fight under Alpa Scotland United. There should be Green Scotland United candidates, or maybe even some independent Scotland United. Because if you maximise the independence vote, unshackle it from whatever's happening to the SNP as a party, and ask people to vote for it on a manifesto, which for reasons best known to others, has not had any clarity on independence for the last 9 years, but assumes the clarity of saying what Ash Regan said in the SNP election, that you should fight each and every election on a mandate for Scottish independence. And if you get a majority in that election between the parties which have said so, we are seeking a mandate to negotiate independence, then that's exactly what you should do. You should galvanise the independence vote. The people across this nation, not 47%, but probably a lot more, who recognise the potential of this country to build something new, something democratic, something more equal, something better than what we have at the present moment. You know, Scotland as a nation has never lacked courage, and it's never lacked pride. And if any adult Scot doesn't think that we as a country, mobilising our resources, can't do better than the shambles of Westminster over the last 25 years, then they need to reassess their relationship with their nationality. If you appeal to people on a vision which says the resources of the country should belong to the people of the country, the prospects of producing 5 times as much electricity as this country needs in the cheapest form of big energy from offshore wind is an amazing bonanza, which if we turn it down, as we largely turned down the benefits of oil and gas over the last 50 years, we would be a nation of fools. Alba scored a notable success in a recent local by-election. We overtook the Greens. So we're going to overtake the Greens, and the Liberals are next, and then the Tories, and then Labour and SNP, or SNP and Labour. Anyway, it was a notable success because we overtook the Greens. That was at Dice. And canvassing in Dice on a Saturday afternoon, I was trying to get back in time to watch the rugby. But I thought I was doing my bit for the candidates. I was canvassing a Saturday afternoon, and this lady came to the door in her overcoat on. And I'm thinking to myself, well, good, we'll get finished the canvassing. I said, oh, madam, look, you're going out, obviously. Didn't mean to disturb you. Here's a leaflet from our candidate, Charlie Abel, and move on, right? And she said, no, I'm not going out. I wear my coat in the house on a Saturday afternoon because she couldn't turn her heating on because she can't afford it in the energy capital of Europe. And if anybody in this hall or in this church thinks that is in any way acceptable, when we have it within our means to take control of the most massive energy resources in the continent of Europe and ensure that every family in Scotland can afford their heating and every company in Scotland has access to clean, green, renewable, efficient power, then we need our heads examined. Because if we charge this right, if we liberate the Yes movement to get it back to where it was in 2014, if we recover our enthusiasm for activism, if we sense the opportunity, if we tell the political parties, including Alba, to get their act together for next year's elections, then we will be surprised of how far and how fast this ancient nation of Scotland can progress. And it won't be ere long before we have that freedom that we've sought for so long. Thank you very much.
Right, we're going to move on. Is that working now? We're going to move on now to questions. The first question, Alex kind of touched on it, so I'll start with Neale. Do you think the Alba Party should stand candidates in constituencies rather than just on the list?
Yeah, well, that's a question that is doing the rounds at the moment, and I understand why. I think the difficulty is that it's hard to give a particularly secure answer to it at the moment because things are so fluid. And, you know, if you've got your ear to the ground, the line is that there's worse to come. And so it's hard to know what to predict further down the line. But I think what I would say is, whether we do or we don't, I think it's important that we plan for the possibility for to be ready to step into the fray. You know, I think back to, you know, the comments I made about, you know, whether we challenge our opponents or let them just say the SNP have collapsed and therefore the independence movement is over. Because that's the narrative that they want to portray. Now, if we just say, oh, well, I'm not going to go on this person's show or that person's show, and I'll just give them a free pass, then that narrative, we know, the more you tell a lie, the more people believe it. So I think it's really important to challenge that. But I think, like any battle, you have to get ready for it, whether the battle is training to run a marathon or the battle is political or indeed any other challenge. So you have to do your preparation, you have to do the workout, and I think that's something we need to consider rather than give you a cast iron answer just now. Maybe Alex got an answer.
Jacqui?
Yes, I would agree very much with what Neale has just said. I think that events, we've seen how fast events are changing at the moment, and we'll see where we are when we come to that point, and we will make the right decision at that point. I couldn't give you an answer right now as to what those circumstances will be, but I'm certainly not averse to the idea of standing candidates in the constituencies.
Alec?
I just love Jackie's confidence. We'll make the right decision. I mean, we'll always make the right decision, of course. But, I mean, it is a sensible point to say that we don't know. I mean, you can predict the future to a certain extent, but you don't know everything that's going to happen. I think the right thing for Alba to do about next year's election, which we know is going to happen next year, there isn't due a Scottish election until 2026. But the general election next year, we should make the offer to the SNP and the other independence parties to have a united front, to have a Scotland United campaign. Alba will be part of that. We will stand candidates by agreement. Now, if the SNP and the other parties say, yes, that's a great idea, then that's what we'll do. If they say it's a rubbish idea and we don't care, then we'll take a different strategy. We'll probably stand more candidates. And similarly, when we get to the Scottish elections, it depends entirely what the state of the Scottish Government and the SNP is at that time. Political change can happen very quickly sometimes. I mean, for 50 years, the Irish Parliamentary Party held sway over elections in Ireland. 50 years, the party of Charles Stewart Parnell, King of Ireland, uncrowed King of Ireland. And in 1918, they were swept aside and left with 2 or 3 seats. I think the 2 or 3 they got were uncontested. And Sinn Féin took over because they weren't delivering what they had promised, which was by parliamentary action to deliver an Irish parliament. So political change can happen very quickly. But political cooperation can achieve results as well. And if you are cooperating with the SNP in a Scottish election, although we're rival parties, then you can have a situation where you would stand on the list with the SNP hopefully winning the constituencies, and then you could get a substantial majority for independence, not a narrow one, but a substantial one in the Scottish Parliament. But again, the SNP might say, as they did in 2021, we're not interested, in which case you would embark on a different strategy. What I am certain of is that every election, people in Scotland must have the opportunity to vote themselves into independence. And they must have political parties which say independence is the top line in their manifesto. They must have political parties, as for example next year, who say we're looking for a mandate to negotiate Scottish independence. Not to progress Scotland, not to so as we have more power to beg for a referendum again, but we're looking for a mandate to vote for independence, because unless you give people the opportunity to vote for it, you'll never get it. And so for Alba, and from an Alba point of view, the key thing is not so much which party offers it, but to make sure it's on offer to the electorate of Scotland, because it's something which is actually beyond party, to give people the right to vote for their independence and freedom.
Pick our fights, that's what we'll do. How will Scotland survive if we were independent? Would we have enough cash, Jacqui?
I think I would turn that round and ask, why wouldn't we survive? Why wouldn't we have enough cash? We have, we're a country of similar size and population to many other countries in Europe. We have natural resources coming out of our ears. We have wind, we have, energy, we have water, which is likely to become something very valuable over the next few years, or next decades at least. And I work in education. I work at Fife College, just up the road. And I see every day the students and the students that I work with, the level of hard work and dedication and intelligence that they have. We are, on a level playing field with any other country. So, yes, I think we would survive absolutely fine, and I can see no reason why not.
Alec is an economist.
The most important thing I was ever told in economics was, for most folk, anything over $1 million is just a big number. It took me a while to assimilate the message politically. First political speech I made in terms of a platform for the SNP was in Ballantor in 1977 for the late Willie McRae, who was the candidate in Ross Cromarty and Skye. And I gave them an economic treatise because I was so enthusiastic as an economic student at Scotland's oldest university. I felt that the people of Ballantor had to hear about my wisdom in economics. I actually blotted my copybook rather badly at the time because I started off my speech because I thought I'd better start with a joke to leaven the loaf. So I told them, because Margaret Thatcher had been elected leader of the Conservative Party, and I pointed out to the audience in Ballantor that she was prone to mix up her words. And she told an audience of financiers recently that bureaucracy was strangling Britain like an octopus's testicles. So I stood in that platform about to deliver my economic treatise, and the audience were looking at me stunned. Ballantor being a fishing village in Caithness. And so I stumbled on through the speech, and then Willie McRae got up and wanted to hang a few layers and reverse the clearances and got a standing ovation. A magnificent speech. Anyway, the meeting finishes, and I thought, everybody's forgotten about my little faux pas due to inexperience. I would never say that on a platform now, of course. So the constituency chairman came up to me and said, "You've cost us the seat." I went, "Oh." Now, Willie, bless him, came up to me and said, "Well, Alec, you've learned a valuable lesson tonight. There's no such thing as testicles, nor for the tea." Now, what's the relevance to your question? Well, the relevance is this. When you talk about the economics of Scottish independence, you should talk by example. I was giving the example of Ireland, twice as prosperous as the UK now. I was talking about EFTA, a country of 4 wee countries in Europe. Iceland. All four, incidentally, are among the top 10 in the world in wealth per head. Iceland, what's Iceland got? Well, fish. If only Scotland had fish, And Norway. What's Norway got? Well, it's got oil and gas. Goodness, if only Scotland had oil and gas. Switzerland's got a financial sector. If only Scotland had a financial sector. You see, you match natural resources to expertise, to a talented and innovative population. You try to get a comparative advantage. It means you have a competitive advantage over other people and other companies and other firms and other nations by, for example, accessing your cheap energy resources to give people that advantage. And if you've got access to a wide market of 500 million people, then I'm not saying that that's everything, but I'll tell you what, it's 90% of everything. So I wouldn't have any fears for Scotland's viability as an independent country. After all, if it wasn't the case, they wouldn't be so desperate to hang on to us for all of that time.
Thanks, Greg. I think it's a really interesting question, and the reason it's interesting is because we even ask it. Because we've become so conditioned to believe that there is any doubt about our ability to sustain a healthy economy, in fact, have a more prosperous country, is fed to us on a regular basis. And we have been conditioned, certainly throughout my life, to believe that we're somehow a drain on the Union, that we should be grateful for the great beneficence of our superiors in London. And that is just not true. But the awareness that that question still circulates and still is treated with serious consideration is very revealing. And it highlights something that we need to tackle. It's how do we change the mindset of the people to stop believing that Scotland is somehow incapable of standing up for itself. And, you know, there are plenty of good stats, but, you know, I'll give you a couple. So Scotland uses, apologies for the numbers here, but Scotland uses somewhere between 4 and 6.5 billion kilowatt hours of energy a year. At the moment, we send 35 billion kilowatt hours of energy down south for free without any compensation. By 2030, that number will have increased to 122 billion kilowatt hours, and that is just from a few offshore wind farms. That doesn't take into consideration the wealth of oil and gas, the great potential for the oil fields that, for some reason, the Scottish Government are reluctant to explore, even because the tail is being wagged by the green dog. And it's reckless because that industry is still necessary and that product is still necessary. There are technologies to capture carbon and store it, and we have one of the biggest reserves for carbon storage in the North Sea. So the question is not whether Scotland can or can't become an incredibly prosperous country or not. It's how we communicate that idea and that confidence to the people of Scotland so that that ceases to be a question that is in any doubt whatsoever.
This is the last written question we have, and we'll come to the audience with questions. If you put your hand up and wait till the microphone comes to you. So the last question here is, how soon do you think an independence convention would take to convene, and would Alba be part of it? Alec.
Well, it could and it should be done very quickly. You know, if it takes Alba, I mean, Alba will attend such a convention. If necessary, Alba will convene such a convention. But an independence convention is necessary by rights. The people who should have been convening it are the largest party. That's what they should have been doing. But, and hopefully they will, but if they don't, then Alba will step into the breach. But the organisations that I mentioned earlier, that myriad of independence organisations, they should be stepping forward. Because it's not just about political parties, it's about civic Scotland. It's about people beyond political parties. And therefore that should be done. You know, last autumn, I heard in the House of Commons, I watched in the House of Commons, one of the most significant, one of the best speeches I've ever heard. And I knocked about the House of Commons for 25 years. So I heard a few speeches. I heard some good ones. Heard a lot more bad ones, incidentally, but I heard a few good ones. And I've read some of the great speeches from the past. But one of the best speeches I've ever seen in the House of Commons was delivered by this man here, the Kirkcaldy MP, Neale Hanvey. A speech on his bill for Scottish self-determination, outlining a process by which people could have the opportunity to exercise their national sovereignty. A great speech. I commend it. I understand the bill is being printed because it still lies on the table of the House at the present moment. And I'd advise everybody here to get a copy, read it, stick it on your mantelpiece, above the fireplace, wherever. It's certainly worth looking at, and the speech is certainly worth reading because it encapsulated the fundamental case for Scotland's rights as a nation. And if we're going to win independence, for Westminster are not a constitutional fight on self-identification, not whether we should have a bottle return scheme or not whether we should tell the workers of the North Sea that their services are no longer required. if we want to have a battle with Westminster, and we should, then have it on Scotland's fundamental rights as a country. Ditch the extraneous stuff. It divides the country, and fundamentally it doesn't matter. Concentrate on what really, really matters, and that's the material that was in Neale Hanvey's bill.
I can see the hands up already. Unfortunately, we don't have roving mics, so if you could really shout loud. I'll start with the young lady at the front here. Just for the people at the back who didn't hear that, it's a question about Freeports. Alec, can we start with you this time?
Well, ALPA are opposed to the concept. Freeports is it's a very old idea. I mean, Margaret Thatcher tried it in the 1980s, or the 1970s and 80s. The purpose was to enterprise zones, it was called then. So what you do is you take one area, you make it an enterprise zone, you lower the taxation of business taxes, and you say this is going to benefit prosperity all over. And as was demonstrated by enterprise zones in the 1980s, all you did was displace economic activity from one area to the next area, and you gave out public money, either in the form of no tax or low tax, to people who want. And Freeports is exactly the same. You're going to displace economic activity into one area at the expense of another area, and that is not the way forward. ALPA passed a motion against it. Neale and Kenny have spoken against it in the House of Commons, and we'll continue to do so. As to why the SNP government have accepted it, you would have to ask the SNP government. You know, if you concentrate your objective, I mean, look, I tried when I was First Minister to benefit the economy of Scotland at each and every opportunity. But I tried to do it on the basis of where our strengths were and to accentuate our strengths. And I tried to move beyond what Westminster was doing because I felt it would benefit the country, you know, whether it's Chinese investment in Grangemouth or opening up the Chinese market to Scotch salmon, all that sort of stuff. You don't take second-hand ideas from the Westminster government. I mean, look, if you take a second-hand idea from the London Treasury, you shouldn't be surprised if it blows up in your face. And that's what Freeports will do.
I don't think I have a great deal to add to what Alex has said. I seconded the motion at National Council against Freeports, and that was passed. That's Alba policy that we do not support the Freeports. I did a wee bit of research at that time, and you know the basic concept under different names goes right back to colonial times, and it has never ever been to the benefit of the people or the businesses that are around about, you know, around about that area and in that area. So I absolutely agree with what Alex said. I think it will blow up in our faces, and I do not understand why the SNP have allowed this to happen and agreed to this. And I would hope that it's something that is very reversible. Should we get our independence, I think that it's something that we could undo and should undo very quickly.
Neale?
So this probably won't be a shock to most people, but it seems to be a surprise to some of my former colleagues that I joined a new party when it was set up because I wasn't happy with the policies of the party I was in. And, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise then that in this new party we are critical of other people's ideas. That is the whole point of political discourse, is to engage in, as far as possible, constructive debate and policy refinement. So I'm not criticising the Scottish Government for the sake of it. I'm criticising them because they have wed themselves to two examples I'll give you of profoundly bad choices. Alec's absolutely right that when Westminster come up with an idea that is wedded to neoliberalism, it is in no way to the benefit of the people that you're in charge of improving the lives of. So that should be the first warning. And the fact that they acquiesced on that so readily and tried to dress it up by putting a green in front of it, I think that branding may have not very long to go before it's completely tarnished as well. But you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And whilst I will try and get the best out of it as I can as one of the local constituencies affected by it, it's a profoundly bad idea because it's all about driving down standards and costs and improving the profits for big corporations, and that doesn't benefit real people. And the second one is when you lead a party that's been fighting the case of independence for almost 90 years, and one of the significant concerns that that party has championed over many of those years is the misuse of the natural resources of oil by our near neighbour. It seems bizarre that when you are given the responsibility to sell licences for the next bounty, which is wind, offshore wind, that you would say, yeah, let's give all the money to big industry again. Let's sell it, Alec put it perfectly, let's have an inverted auction. Let's not make an expectation that people have to outbid each other, but that we'll put a limit on what they're allowed to bid. And that is what happened with Scotland. So if you're going to borrow ideas from somebody, at least borrow something that is useful. It's that lack of appetite for ambition that just, I struggle. But I guess I measure it against Alec's time as First Minister. And there was no shortage of ambition for Scotland during those years. And it's just a tragedy that that sense of drive and commitment to the people has been lost.
Any hands up? Roy, please shout.
I'll have to try and not burst into song. I'm a real keen karaoke singer, I'll fight it though. A lot of us here, I suspect, and a lot that will be looking on, a lot of the membership of the Alba Party have found themselves in this position because they've been let down by the SNP. Many of us have invested many years, lots of time, energy, money, to fulfill the dream that we all had and we still have. And it's all went kind of pear-shaped. So, you know, we're here, I'm a bit tentative. You know, some of us had a bit of time off, you know, licking our wounds, what we're going to do ourselves. There's trust issues. We're here tonight, and I'm here tonight hoping this is the thing that will take us on. Now, I'm going to ask a question. I know the answer to it. I just want to ask you to reassure me and everybody else that's watching, as Alba grows and becomes the dominant force, political force in Scotland, I want you to just reassure me that nothing will change, that we won't turn in, you know, that you will remain the same and we won't go the way the SNP was. Thank you.
Alec?
Well, I became leader of the SNP for the first time in 1990. I took it into the Scottish Parliament, became the official opposition in that Parliament. I became leader of the SNP again in 2004, and I took Scotland to a referendum in 2014 where people had the opportunity to vote themselves into independence. I felt I discharged my responsibility. I did what I said I was going to do. Obviously, I would have liked the referendum to go a different way, but I left in 2014 pretty contented because, like Colin from St Andrews or Kirkcaldy, I thought the direction of politics was certain. I thought that you had got to a certain level. When I became an MP in 1987, the SNP had 3 seats, 14% of the vote. When I left it, we had 57% in the opinion polls and a majority again after the referendum for independence. So reasonably, I thought things were set reasonably fair for where Scotland was going to go as a country. In terms of what Alba does as a political party, we're 2 years old. We had our 2nd annual conference in Stirling last October. And on the day the conference was over, I was walking out and a delegate came up to me and said, he says, this conference reminds me of the SNP conferences of the 1990s. And then he paused and he said, of which no praise could be higher. So whatever else happens or doesn't happen to Alba, you can be absolutely certain that Alba is a party which will retain its democratic structures, where the executive of the party will be elected by the membership of the party, and which will always, at every election it contests, have independence as the first item on its manifesto and give people the opportunity to vote for Alba and to vote for freedom.
Neale?
Yeah, Roy, I won't give up and I won't give in, and I'm absolutely committed to the cause. But the one observation that I would make is that if we are, as a movement, to be serious about delivering independence, then the people that we elect as a movement, whether it's a political party, mixture of parties, whatever, all of those people must make a very firm undertaking to extract ourselves from that parliament as swiftly as possible. And I think we've got to have a very serious conversation about the calibre of people that we send. We've got some absolutely outstanding, experienced people in our movement, people who have been purposefully shut out of elections. It's absolutely crackers. I could not believe what I found when I eventually got to Westminster, the lack of energy, enthusiasm and desire to see independence delivered. And people attack me because I spoke the truth. And I've got a question for them, which is, would you rather I lied to you? Because I'm not prepared to do that. And I think that's got to be how we take things forward. We've got to be clear with each other and be honest. But absolutely, we mustn't get confused about this ever again.
Jacqui?
Well, I wouldn't ever want to make a promise that I don't have the power to keep. But what I would say is, I think the big difference, the big problem with what has happened in the SNP is that they spent so long as the only independence party without actually achieving independence, and so became kind of able to become complacent on that basis. I think the big difference is that if Alba ever, as you said, became the predominant political force, we would be moving towards independence as quickly as possible. And once independence is achieved, the whole political, the whole political landscape changes. So that's why I feel that we will not end up in that situation.
Unfortunately, time's caught up with us, so one more question. The guy in the blue.
I'm thinking about mechanisms as to how we can get a yes. I'm thinking about how we can get mechanisms in order to be able to get the judiciary, the Supreme Court, to say, yes, we have that right, because they are the people who interpreted the Scotland Act, 1998, and they said that Scotland did not have a unilateral right to vote for independence. Thinking about this, when you're forming a contract, you have to be informed. When that contract was signed, it was never in the intention or the understanding, even possibility, that we would have a Brexit. So that when we formed that contract, we were uninformed. And under an uninformed contract, surely you then have a right to rectify an error.
We never actually caught the beginning of your question there.
The question is that the Scotland Act, which is what governs our right to have a unilateral or not a unilateral vote to say yes, so we don't, under the Scotland Act, Scotland cannot say that it wants to have a referendum. It has to be agreed also by Westminster. My point is this, is that when we created the Scotland Act in 98, nobody ever envisaged that we would have Brexit. It wasn't on the table in any form or shape. Therefore, there were clauses in the Scotland Act that could not have been considered. Therefore, the contract itself has an error which couldn't be envisaged. Under contract law, we may be able to renegotiate it.
Now, Alec.
Sure, Scotland's right of self-determination doesn't depend on the Scotland Act. Scotland's right of self-determination depends on Scotland being a nation. Now, the Scotland Act explicitly, as you'll see from, if you go back to Hansard, you'll see repeated many times that nothing in the legislation would inhibit in any way Scotland's right of self-determination. So you don't rest your claim to have a vote on self-determination on the Scotland Act. Why should you? And nobody should do that. Going to the Supreme Court was an act of madness. I mean, look, think about it this way. You want to dissolve the United Kingdom. So is it a good idea to go to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom and say, we'd like to ask your advice on how to dissolve the United Kingdom and, by the way, dissolve the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom? Few organisations in history have ever voted for the self-destruction. So going to the Supreme Court was a nonsense. You're in a political argument about how you exercise Scotland's national right of self-determination. There's a whole variety of ways you can do that. You can do it by public pressure, you can do it by lobbying, you can do it by institutional pressure, you can do it by international lobbying. These are all instruments by which you exercise Scotland's right of self-determination. Now, all of this has been done through Scottish history. You know, people say, we should go to the UN. Absolutely. Why not? That's what they did in 1320. The Declaration of Arbroath was an appeal to the Avignon papacy. It was the United Nations of its day. But you know something about the Declaration of Arbroath? They went to the Avignon Papacy after they'd won independence on the field of battle. They didn't go to the Avignon Papacy and say, incidentally, we'd like you to make us independent. They went to the Avignon Papacy and said, look, we've won, we reclaimed Scotland, and we want you to recognise that. Now, you don't do battles these days. The battles are in the field of politics. That's the democratic era. That's why politics is important, because it has to show and demonstrate the mandate for independence. But your legitimacy entitlement doesn't depend on an act of the United Kingdom or the Scotland Act, or a Section 30 for that matter. These are merely devices in which you can exercise the national sovereignty of Scotland. So when England says no, you conjure up the arguments and the reasons and the political pressure to change their minds. The referendum route, I think, because of I think it was a perfectly respectable argument to follow it, and came to the opportunity in 2014, but it's now reached a dead end because of the daftness of going to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. So you have to find another route. There's going to be an election next year. You use the election. There's going to be a Scottish election in 2025. You use the Scottish election. You use any democratic mandate for the legitimacy to negotiate Scottish independence. The idea of having an election voting us to independence is not a new one. Successive British Prime Minister says it was fine. Harold Wilson, Margaret Thatcher, the greatest enemy of Scottish independence in recent political history, said in her memoirs, The Downing Street Years, Scotland is an ancient nation. If the Scots were to vote for independence, no English politician, certainly not myself, should gainsay that process. That was accepted. None of this. A lot of folk in Scotland find it convenient to think there's these prison bars, these big bad entities are going to stop us doing things. The only people that stop us doing things are us. So if we want to become independent, then make the opportunity, give people the opportunity to vote ourselves into independence. Prepare the ground through an independence convention, through the mobilisation of the public, through the international pressure, to make sure you can back it up. And if we don't do that, then for goodness sake, don't blame anybody else. Just make sure that every single election, there are people standing in every single constituency who say we're looking for a mandate to negotiate Scottish independence, and then make sure they deliver.
This is the very last question of the night. Jacqui and Neale give an answer to that, because Alex covered it, so carry on.
It's about Scotland's claim of right. I believe it was written into the Scotland Act, and Westminster actually agreed on it and signed it off, that these people here tonight are sovereign. They are Scots. And according to the claim of right, these people are sovereign, not Westminster government, not the Scottish government, not a party, not a politician. These people there are sovereign, right? The king is not sovereign. In Scotland, the people are sovereign, right? Now, what I want to come from the point of is, why are we keeping on asking Westminster if we could become independent if we are sovereign? Why are we doing that? Westminster is never going to let us go, because we are the gravy train that keeps that thing ticking down there, right? So why do we keep keeping on and begging crumbs at the master's table when we in Scotland can have the whole cake? We can have the bakery, never mind the whole cake, right? It's time to take them to task. And I believe with all my heart that the people should be given that right, but how do we bring the right together in order to do it? We need to take Westminster to the International Courts of Human Law, because they already agree that Scotland has the right to be independent. And it isn't going to happen till we take it out of Westminster's hands. Where do we go from here?
I could give you a very long answer, but I'll try and give you a reasonably swift answer. It's a really important issue, and it's fundamental to Scots law. Scots law rests on the claim of right, not Magna Carta, so it is fundamentally different. However, what you have to be able to do, I mean, I don't disagree with what you say, I don't think anybody would, but what you have to do is you have to convince the people that that's the truth. And you have to win a democratic process to establish that truth. And so whether we like it or not, it's not a magic bullet, but it is a very important strand. And if you think about circumstantial evidence, so if you've got circumstantial evidence and you use pencils as a metaphor for that, you've got one piece, you can snap it quickly. You add 5 to that, you can probably still snap it, but it'll be harder. Once you've got a good bundle of pencils, it becomes impossible. And so our task is to use all of those strands, to build them together, to unite them into a convincing argument that does command the support of the Scottish people that would be measured in a democratic process, as Alex said. And then, you know, God help them if they try and deny us then. That won't happen. They won't get away from it. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. You need to have people with the guts, determination and gumption to go down to Westminster, bang the table and say, we're out.
And I think the last word of the evening should go to the Right Honourable Alex Salmond.
Thank you. Well, you're absolutely correct, but the claim of right, or the declaration of Scottish sovereignty, the assertion of the sovereignty of the people, is the golden thread which has run through Scottish history. Right back to the Declaration of Arbroath, started in 1689, and started right back to the Declaration of Arbroath, where probably for the first time in European history, you have a document which says, we think you should back good King Robert, because he is wonderful. He has won for us. He's the first guy who's actually repelled the English. He's now King of Scots. But then it goes on to say, but incidentally, if he sells us out, if he doesn't progress our rights, we'll get rid of him and we'll get somebody else. The first declaration in European history of the idea of contractual government, the idea of a popular sovereignty, the idea that the community of the realm was bigger than the king or the monarchy or any other established force. And that same principle, that's why the King of Scots is not the King of Scotland, or the Queen of Scots recently was not the Queen of Scotland, she was the Queen of Scots. That's where the title comes from the people. I went to the Accession Council. People say, why did you go to the Accession Council? Well, here's a secret for you. I went to the Accession Council because I wanted to see Charles III sign the Claim of Right, swear allegiance as he had to do in the ceremony. If you look back at my Twitter feed, you'll see 6 tweets explaining to the world the significance, if you strip away the sectarian rubbish from the 17th century, essentially what it means, he had to swear allegiance in Scotland to the Claim of Right, not to the Bill of Rights in England, but to the Claim of Right, which was an assertion of the sovereignty of the people. So that is the legitimacy. That is the legitimacy. That's the fundamental legal position. That's why Lord Cooper in 1953 said there is no comparable constitutional basis in Scots law for the sovereignty of the Queen in Parliament. The Scottish constitutional tradition lies in the sovereignty of the people. That's absolutely correct. Then you say we should go to the UN. Of course we should. I remember back in the 70s, there was a Scotland UN committee. Absolutely right. Let's do that. Let's go there. Let's go here. Let's go to the International Court Arbitration. Let's go to the Strasbourg Court. But none of them are going to deliver independence for Scotland. What you have to do is to win it by majority in a democratic vote on the field of politics. And then, of course, you can ask the international courts for their agreement to assert that you've asserted your right and therefore they've got to back you up in democratic terms. Doesn't mean you shouldn't make initiative. Now, of course you should. What's wrong with making initiatives? But you can't get away from the fact you've got to win a majority in a democratic enfranchised election. And all you can demand of your politicians, and you have the right to demand it, is they make sure that someone is standing with that on their manifesto, so that people have the right and entitlement to vote for it, by the incompetence of the SNP. And it is because of the incompetence of the SNP. The referendum route has been closed off. That wasn't the position back in 2015. Even, what's her name, Ruth Davidson said, oh, well, you can have a referendum if you get a majority in the Scots Parliament. But unless you pursue something with vigour, determination, and you mean it, then eventually people will start to laugh at it. And right now, Westminster's laughing at Scotland. For the first time in 30 years, the Westminster are back to saying, ho, 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 the quaint, silly Scots, they'll moan and they'll groan, but they'll never blow the house down. That panic, which is what it was, came to a peak in 2014. Last week in 2014, David Cameron was phoning up everybody in the world to try and Barack Obama, Vladimir Putin, Angela Merkel, Her Majesty the Queen. They all got the begging phone calls, help, help, help. Maybe the Scots actually mean it. He wasn't laughing then, but they're laughing now. And if we want to turn that laughter into something akin to admiration, then we know how to do it, and there is no other way to do it. We have to get people into the polling stations, get their votes in the ballot box, and vote our country to freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Fife Lacu, I want to thank Neale, Jacqui and Alec for coming along tonight. Most of all, I want to thank every one of you for coming out. What this proves is Scottish independence is alive, well, and we're kicking it. Thank you.